creepy things creeping around in our increasingly creepy world. Isn't the world supposed to get less creepy? It's a little more creepy.
You think as we get more technologically advanced, less creepiness, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know about it either. In fact, if you think about like the notion of the creepypasta, we had a cat that has passed on, and one of her nicknames was Noodle. And she used to creep around when she was looking for food, earning her name the Creepypasta. But creepypastas are specifically urban legends that originate and deal with the internet.
Yeah.
And so technology has found its own little thing. But then there's like the old school, the tried and true, like we've talked the boogeyman, but then there's the Night Hag. And there seems to be the notion of like these night things that come around when kids are sleeping and everyone else is sleeping, presumably. But the Night Hag and there's the Slender Man talking about creepypastas. There's the Hat Man and the Night Hag. A lot of these are associated with sleep paralysis, but it's kind of like the thing of like, well, does sleep paralysis allow you to experience it? Do they cause the sleep paralysis because they're creepy things that can do that kind of thing? There are tales of this all around the world, and remarkably, a lot of them go back to creepy old women, long-nailed women that sit on your chest or strangle you or things like that. The story basically goes like this. You've got a person is awakening. Oftentimes, for whatever reason, there's this mythical time of 3 a.m. that is associated with this stuff. And they wake up and find themselves unable to move. And there's something in their visual field, a figure. And oftentimes what happens is the figure creeps slowly towards them until it's finally on top of them. And there's a sense of something holding them down, strangling them, otherwise impeding their breath or a weight on the chest. And so if you go back to medieval times, you've got earlier versions of this, the Succubus, which is the seductive. Okay, so you've got the Incubus and the Succubus. The Incubus is like the boy version that kills women. And then the Succubus is the girl version that kills, I say boys and girls because I'm like 12, It's the girl version that kills boys, And specifically, okay, it's like a seductive spirit. It's sometimes associated with I don't know if I should go and call this a demon or not. Lilith, the idea of Lilith, who's this very muddy kind of figure that emerges from
Mesopotamian, Sumerian type.
Yeah, like it's a Mesopotamian, Sumerian, Babylonian, because of course all that smears together too because of how all the cultural stuff bleeds into the other stuff. It seems to at one point be described as Lilith in the Midrash, rabbinical writings that are outside of the actual scripture, but rabbinical writings that have to, and the idea of this was an explanation for why there are two creation stories, one of which includes Eve proper, and the other one doesn't really. Like it just says God created man and woman and blah, 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 blah. And then there's this other story that comes after it that sort of starts again. And it's like, well, why were there two? And one of the explanations from the Midrash is the first wife was disobedient to Adam and so had to be cast out, and she became the mother of demons. Well, okay, and so you've got this figure in Sumerian, Babylonian, Mesopotamian culture. There's some archaeology person out there that's shaking their fist at me right now, like, how you smeared all those together? Because I'm uneducated. So this idea, though, that maybe the Succubus, moving forward in time here, is Lilith, seducing the good Christian men out there. with her sexual ways. And and so it's easy to imagine how this all gets balled up into the witch hunts, the quest for witches, and for their valuable land, and freeing society from old women with land. And men. The witch hunts were not entirely a woman phenomenon. It was largely that. It was largely around the idea of the witch. The popular idea of the witch is the woman who has become a consort of the devil and gets powers from the devil and therefore works for the devil in the world, and so on and so forth, often by seducing otherwise good Christian men. Those evil witches, leading them astray. They wouldn't have been led astray otherwise if it weren't for witches. And so you've got this idea that balls up largely into also Irish culture and hops across the Atlantic to Newfoundland in Canada, where we find some cool Night Hag stories. But now Newfoundland is very Irish, very Irish. It has been described as the second most Irish place outside of Ireland. That there's just a ton of Irish settlers there, and this story of the Night Hag, which is still very popular in Newfoundland, but this pops up all over the place. And it's often an old woman. So you've got I grabbed a couple of them from around the ways. We've got in Brazil, there's a hag type woman known as the Pisadeira, or she who steps. And she waits on rooftops for somebody that has gone to bed with a full belly. And she'll get them and kill them and presumably eat them because they have something good in their belly. There is a figure in the Philippines known as the Batty Bat. Now, the Batty Bat, from what I understand, is actually not usually a skinny, scary old woman. She's a fat, scary old woman, a well-fed, scary old woman that lives in trees. And if you fell that tree and make a house out of that tree, whatever post was made from that tree, the person that sleeps close to it could be gotten at by the Batty Bat, who similar MO, crush the life right out of you. And so winding back, because I just can't go in a straight line apparently, all the way back to around the time of the Succubus, we've also got this notion of the nightmare, which is literally a horse. That's why we get the name Nightmare. It's a horse that I believe. I'm not sure if that also had the crushing power, or if it would just, we don't need to talk about scary horse stories. You and I could talk about some horse stories, nearly crushing us, the crushing life out of us. But we'll keep those for future tales. But so that's here we go. I mean, that is the foundational tales of the Night Hag. And then what the heck is it? Is it just sleep paralysis? Is it a thing? What are these things?
My familiarity with this only really comes out of like fairy tale type stuff, right? It's usually like the obviously like the Grimm's fairy tale, like the old woman who wants to eat kids and has in the woods, right? And then or like Snow White. I specifically think of like Snow White, the cartoon, the like the evil, witch who's like turns herself into an old woman to like trick Snow White, into whatever, eating the apple. I think there's more in the actual fairy tale. Like she tries a couple times and then it's finally the apple thing that gets her, in the end. But I can't recall what it was. Like it's like, but they probably made better choices for editing because the apple thing really works out. And plus, I guess again the apple has that kind of tricking
Adam and Eve
tricking
kind of
people, yeah,
thing.
Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Like I was thinking also like, starting the Trojan War,
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
thing with like giving that the
Golden
fate
apple.
and then there's like the other parts are like role-playing games, like hag creatures are often in there and then that's evolved into various forms, not just like the typical woods one, but there's like ones that live in the sewer, ones that are almost like lycanthrope, like that kind of, it's like there's various like, but they're always kind of that kind of thing. But yeah, it's but it does seem like that's most of my familiarity. I didn't really know that much about the whole, they were like supposed to be like get you in your sleep. I was thinking more they just like lived in the woods and ate children, or they were or they were witches kind of thing.
Yeah, it's cool. South Carolina, there's a notion of the hag, which seems to be conflated in some ways with an entity known as the Boo Hag, which probably came from a blend of African folklore with other present folklores. And there's this interesting thing in the Carolinas and in Appalachia in general, this concept of the haint. And there's specifically a type of blue, paint blue, and it's used to paint the underside of porches largely in the Carolinas, but in Appalachia. And the idea is that it is the color of the blue sky, and that haints don't realize that it's not the sky, and they just keep going. They just keep going past. They don't hang out, haunt your place kind of thing. But yeah, so you've got these weird conflation kinds of things. I'll tell you what, when I was looking up stuff on night hags, there are all kinds of weird nighttime games/rituals for dealing with spirits, kind of getting them to come around, and haunt slumber parties or whatever. But it's not just slumber parties. So there's some really, I mean, this might be a topic for a whole show about night games for summoning spirits. There's such good stuff out there. And some of them were just like, they're just really creepy weird. And I just think to myself, okay, going back to like the idea of like wandering around liminal spaces, like there's this elevator game. I won't dwell, I'm the king of the freaking unrelated tangent. Increasingly unrelated tangent. There's an elevator game that you go to certain floors in a certain area, and if certain people get on, you're not to acknowledge or talk to them. And if it goes to a certain floor before this happens, leave and don't use that building again. But this is like weird kinds of stuff of going to weird places and things that take you elsewhere. It's really kind of odd stuff. I apologize. I don't know why I went down that. That had something to do with this.
Anyway. Well, this is hags and elevators. That seems like a modern weird version of that.
I found a thing for if you want to see the hag, if you want to summon the hag, do these things. One of the things is typical. This is involved with witchcraft as well. Saying the Lord's Prayer backwards, right? And we've all heard this. I used to have nightmares about this. This happens. Catholic stuff gives you problems. I'm the poster child for it.
And being raised Catholic, we can say that.
Yeah, that's right. Nothing against Catholics that made it through unscathed, if such a thing exists.
I will stand aside.
You're the guys. You don't get to talk about this. I used to have dreams where I was accidentally saying the Lord's Prayer backwards and couldn't get away from it. And here I'm going to summon the devil. Goes back to the Bloody Mary thing. See, it wasn't just Catholicism. It had help. So yeah, apparently there are people out there that are interested in seeing the hag. I don't want to cut to the chase on my feelings on this, so I won't. I'll wait till later to let you know.
Yeah.
One thing I will say, I think it's interesting that no, granted, I haven't done a whole lot of research on the topic, but I find it interesting that people see the same general things, and people might just say, well, that's like because we're all humans, so like our human brain, it's all like fundamentally the same. Yeah. But I think it's interesting that it's like you have the hag and variations of the hag, you have the hat man, you have shadow people. It's like these same same few things. It's not like no one's seeing dragons from what I understand.
Not usually,
No one's
yeah.
seeing giant butterflies.
Yo, but hold on though. You mentioned a dragon, okay? We'll have to talk about the Jersey Devil eventually.
Okay, yeah.
And Mothman. Is that a giant butterfly? It's moths and butterflies,
So,
Not that he really looks like a
Mothra? No, I don't
Mothra.
know.
Oh man.
No.
Yeah,
but you're not seeing them as part of the awakening process, as part of like if you have sleep paralysis, or if you're in the process of going to sleep or whatever. No one's as far as I know, no one's seeing those things. It's all like very similar. You get like that. It's this bucket of hag, this bucket of hat man, and this bucket of shadow people, and I think that's generally it. Or you might see maybe a ghost, or like people might say that or something. But I feel like it's
right.
You don't get a lot of variation when it comes to that aspect, and I find it very, very interesting.
Yeah. I agree, because it's like, okay, so the idea of it's just sleep paralysis, right? And therefore, and it's kind of like, like your alarm clock goes off, and like it's something else going on in the dream. It's trying to keep you in the dream, which is its own curious thing. Why would the brain want to keep you in a dream if there's a weird noise going on in your environment? Dreams are their own little world. Why though? Okay, so your brain might, okay, go back to the materials. So, oh, well, yeah. You're sleeping on your back. So you've had more pressure on your chest, and therefore it made up a story. Something's on your chest. Maybe there's a primal memory of, I don't know, how would you hold on to a primal memory of a predator on your chest? You're probably not making through that in the, but like this kind of idea. Well, maybe it's just your brain making up a story of what that pressure could be, but really it's just the weight of gravity on your chest because you were sleeping on your back and you've got this sleep paralysis because you didn't quite. Okay, fine. Why do all of the, okay, I can't say all because the world is a big place. Why do so many of these stories have a humanoid figure that seems to be the enemy? And there's another weird factor to it. It's giving me goosebumps just saying it. It's that the thing seems to take delight in the fact that the person is scared. Like there seems to be something about it. There's this idea, whether perpetuated from, because this is largely like Western English speaking accounts of this aspect that I found, is this idea of it takes delight. Well, there's this story that kind of perpetuates I'm just gonna say, in American culture, that they feed off of the energy of your fear, which is like a very like kind of contemporary idea, like that there's this invisible energy out there. That invisible energy is not a new idea, right? Okay, it's a very, very old idea. But the idea that these things feed off of your fear, like a vampiric kind of thing, and therefore it delights in you being scared because it gives it power or energy or something like that. Although that does seem to be in the accounts. Is it there because it's part of our common story? Is it part of our common story because it's part of that, of the
I was
accounts?
gonna say, like, maybe there's something like, because like you were talking, just like going back to like, well, it's funny because like I was thinking like you were talking about like Lilith and stuff like that. Isn't it in Vampire the Masquerade, the game, right? That it's like Lilith is supposed to be like the first vampire or something like that in like that kind of lore. I don't know where that stems from. I'm sure they pulled it from some other book or something, because I don't feel like that's an original idea to that kind of thing. But then I was thinking about like the original concept of like the vampire, like if you're looking at the vampire, like they're both like, they show up usually when you're kind of asleep, they get you, right? Like the vampire literally sucks your blood, right? Like it's like, but like you're saying, it's like, is that just like the kind of like a metaphorical thing for that to kind of, taking your whatever life force or something away. They're doing something to you, right? To like, to steal something, right? But isn't that kind of like, but like the modern version of sleep paralysis is like jumping away from like, this might be jumping too much from like the weird the hag mythology and stuff like that. The alien abduction, right? That's what they do too. They come over you while you're sleeping. You're in sleep paralysis. They're a weird kind of shadowy figure with strange eyes. They do something, and they're always there to like that take something from you, whether they're probing you or doing stuff or like things like that. You know, it's like you can't sleep and you're surrounded by people and they're doing something to but it's like but that's kind of like another variant of that kind of thing.
Gnome things and golden axe coming.
Yeah. Well, you just have to kick them and then they
drop all your cash. But yeah, the alien thing though, yeah, I mean that's straight on. And I mean, witches and aliens both come from the sky.
Right.
We're gonna have to do a thing on witches eventually, because witches aren't just women practicing magic or men practicing magic. They're monsters, they're things that have been living here. I mean, they're all kinds of variations on what a witch is, from a corrupted human all the way just to some otherworldly beast thing, And of course, what do we call a witch? Because if I see something, honey baba, in Japanese culture, is it a witch? Well, we have to agree on a definition then, right? We have to come up with some terms of what delineates it and things like that.
Yeah, it's not, or like Baba Yaga, like
Baba Yaga. She's kind of a cannibal witch.
But isn't she also sometimes helpful? Like she's like helps, like she tests people or something like that.
Yeah, I feel like
she's kind of like a weird I think I remember something from that it's like where it's like somewhere in the hero's journey, like she helps, or there's variations of her that help.
I feel like there are. Yeah, if you win
story.
at her games, a lot of times you have this thing. I'm going back to the night games again. That if you win at their games, you get something. But if you lose, you lose big time. And so it's and with Baba Yaga, you've got a similar thing there. Like she's similar to the Hansel and Gretel witch, that
she has a magical house that has chicken legs and can walk around.
Yeah. Sometimes she flies around in a basket or a mortar and pestle or what, just floating around and there you go, the herbalism and the weird kinds of association with people doing weird stuff not in the city,
It's interesting. Well, I was going to go back unless you want to continue.
No. If I continue, we're not coming back to the hag.
Yes. So you gotta keep jumping back. Keep it on track here, guys.
So Baba, one thing you said that was interesting, you talked about the idea of the hag feeding off of fear, getting the energy from fear. Yeah. And then, we talked about vampires. We kind of segued back into that. And that made me think of this. You have what are called energy vampires, where it's like, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this. I know I have experienced this on many occasions, where it's like you might be in the room with someone and they just like suck the energy out of you, and like before you know, you're just completely drained, to be redundant, So and I wonder if it's almost like a very similar concept, where it's like they take that fear and they can, in theory, take that fear and it turns it into its own energy. I don't know, it just made me think of that. I thought it was an interesting concept.
It reminds me actually of the conversation you and I have had, what's that series? Who Lives in the Dark? Or
What We Do in the Shadows. Yes, it has an energy vampire in there. He's like, he's a very boring corporate guy.
We've got energy vampire corporations out there that just kind of.
They might be sitting on our chests in different ways.
Yeah.
It's interesting too. You brought up, you brought up the aliens, and that's another bucket which I completely forgot about. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And I'd be very curious. I don't know if there's a way to find this, but I'd be very curious. Like, how far back does that go? Does that predate, like the 1940s here in the States? Does that predate the 1900s? Like, where does that originate? Or did that come about more as like pop culture, where people started to talk about, like, I saw like a 3-foot tall gray guy, and then it became a thing,
It's totally weird. It's totally weird, because like before you have flying saucers, you've got airships, you've got like tales of Magonia and these ideas of this place up in the sky, Magonia, and these people that live there, and airships, and people that come down in airships that are like boats, like they're not flying saucers. Why do they look like that? That definitely is not very aerodynamic looking, you know? But that blends in. I'm gonna stop myself, but it blends in with tales of the wild man and people that are associated with coming down from the sky that are like they look like they're out of time, like they're there and they're dirty and they've got some weird musket that might not work, but they're in a weird time that shouldn't no one should be carrying a musket, you know, like a more contemporary time. Like weird tales of Magonia and stuff like that. But yeah, the tales of visitors from the sky, it's like it's old in that way, but I'm not sure how many of them, going back to probably where you were going with it, how many of them show up in your bedroom at night and are up to something. Yeah, like
maybe it's just like, I don't know. I mean, it could just be something as simple as like, you know, it is a little more nondescript, right? Like the thing that attacks you. And so some people conflate it with, you know, okay, the hag. Like it's like, oh, well, it must be this evil creature thing, and then we make stories about it. Or some people conflate it with like, well, contemporary things like aliens, and some people conflate it with, you know, a shadow person of some sort, you know. And it's like really what it is. It's just like that's just us throwing whatever iconography we have at the time on top of it, versus what it actually is, you know, and whatever fits our thing, you know, because like when alien stuff makes it into the zeitgeist, well, now the thing transforms into an alien. When it was fear of old people and living out in the woods, you know, it was like we're scared of them, and they're the aliens of society, you know. It's like it's like
fae,
fairy. I was gonna say like something like fairies and things, or like I mean, I guess like in a weird similar. I mean, not quite the same because doesn't have the same activity, but like something like banshee, they just show up usually at night, usually like they're usually portents of some kind of doom or whatever, you know. But it's like but that falls into the same kind of night creature that shows up, you know, or the and I guess like in a weird sense, maybe to a lesser degree, but like imps, you know, have a like element of that. Like you were talking about the one that's in the woods. Imps are similar kind of thing because they're like parts of trees, but then imps morph into like familiars. They're usually like witches familiar, you know. It's like it's like they start out as these little wood tree creatures, and then they become these kind of familiar, you know. But it's like, but they're also like sneaking, you know, around at night and doing things, or or you know, be like, you know, it's like, so it has that kind of vibe. Like maybe it's just like that, like there's like something, and we just keep reassigning the iconography to it every time we kind of move further along the time. the timeline. You're like it's not any of those one things. That's just how we're using to describe this weird thing, you know, that seems to keep happening to people.
there's a prolific writer on UFO stuff named Jacques Vallée, and he's got this kind of idea, which I will now misrepresent, and it goes something like this idea that basically what we've been dealing with this whole time has been the same thing, and it's this thing that is beyond our ability to perceive what it actually is yet, and that we cloak it in the most appropriate symbols of the time, and it tends to take the shape we give it. Now, does it take the shape we give it because it knows what shape to take, or does it take the shape we give it because we don't know what the hell it is and we put the best possible explanation from our consciousness to try to get it, and it's going to show up like aliens or something like that, you know? But people still see other weird things too. So it's like, I wonder what makes the difference between whether it's a hag or an alien? And is the difference which creature showed up or who it's happening to, or, I mean, who knows, you know?
Well, the interesting thing too, it's, and I can't speak from personal experience, but just relaying stories that I've heard. So, you know, and I take the stance, you know, it's either the people are telling the truth, they're fabricating it, or they are telling a story which they believe is true, but was actually misinterpreted what was really going on. Okay.
Right.
So,
Right.
it's interesting. I've heard stories where people say that, like, that Hat Man, for instance, that's a very common icon associated with sleep paralysis. But I've heard stories where people say, like, no, they saw him, like, in a parking lot. And, he was there under a light, should have been lit up, wasn't lit up. And then, like, was there for a couple minutes and then just poof, gone. Or the same thing with like other shadow people, where it's like you see them, they're walking and then all of a sudden they're gone. Or the little grays, that people see them when they're awake. So it's just fascinating that it's not specifically tied to sleep paralysis only, that there are these stories that these allegedly occur when people are fully awake as well, which kind of leads to what you're saying about like maybe these, if you want to believe all this, that maybe these things are out there and, they show us what we want to see or whatever.
Yeah. Or certain states of consciousness allow us to be able to perceive those things. Like being in a state of, when you're waking up from sleep is known as hypnopompia. It's basically like hypnagogia, but it's the other, you're coming out of it. It's much more common for people to experience the hag during hypnopompia than hypnagogia, or however you say that.
So what's the difference between those two again?
Hypnagogia is when you're falling asleep and you're between waking consciousness and REM sleep. You're somewhere in there. And that's the space where you experience what's often referred to as reverie, or hypnagogic hallucinations, which would sound like people talking in the room. Oftentimes they're very vivid. They don't lend themselves very well to control, unlike other dream elements. So it's actually a very interesting place to be in terms of consciousness, because you can't, if you're in a dream and you're having a dream, there's some level of control you can often exert. When you're in hypnagogia or hypnopompia, it tends to be more resistant to that, which makes it really interesting that that's the place where these things tend to happen. And so there are attempts to get at this place in consciousness. Okay, so float tanks, sensory deprivation experiments like the Gansfield experiments and things, which there are versions of these things you can do on YouTube and stuff like that, for experiencing these weird states of consciousness where you might be able to perceive things you might not have been able to perceive otherwise. So skeptics will say that's because that stuff wasn't there, or always was there, and you're just making it more significant than it was. And believers or people that aren't skeptics might say, well, hey, it's something you're perceiving because you've altered your ability to perceive what's out there. So are these hags and things always there and we don't know them? And only when we're in certain states are we susceptible to being able to interact with them? What's the relationship between this and, we talked about like Bloody Mary, or like a lot of these rituals that have to do with like you stay up late at night and you do these things. Is it because your brain is wiggly and weird and doesn't work as well? Or is it because you get outside of the frames, the constraints of normal perception, and now you are free to perceive things free from those constraints?
I'll tell you what, man, I told you guys this story before, but for the sake of the show, I'll say it again. I'll give it a very abbreviated version of it. But there was that one time when I got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and I was super, super tired. Normally, like, I wake up and I'm like, I'm awake enough, like, navigating whatever. And I saw a shadow person, like, run into the entryway of the doorway. And you know when like you're playing tag as a kid and you're maybe like rounding a building, and as you round the building you see the person that's it, and like you quick try to stop and like your kind of body does one of these, and that's exactly what happened with this shadow person. Like it entered the doorway, I saw it, presumably it saw me, like it does this, like momentum carries it forward and then it darts back the other direction. And it was so cool, either regardless of whether it was real or not, that's moot. Okay, that doesn't even matter.
The experience was real.
The experience was real, and it was awesome. And the physics behind it, how like it actually did what is. So if it was all in my head, the fact that I could create that, so cool. And I attribute it to exactly what you just said. Like this particular night, I got up to use the restroom and I was like super tired. I don't know if it was like maybe I was only asleep for an hour, so like getting up then I was all groggy or whatever it was, just the part of the cycle I was in. But it was cool though. It was really cool, and I think there's something to be said about that. Like when you're in a certain state, you know, whether it's all in your head or otherwise, regardless, I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I have the opposite of sleep paralysis. I'm a sleepwalker. And so like I don't so the hag might be in for a surprise.
He's gonna get up and walk away.
Get her. Yeah.
Real quick, I'm reminded of Weekend at Bernie's in the very beginning when the guy tries to mug one of the main characters, like, hey, get away from me, it's too hot.
It's gonna be like that this week here. I've often wondered, can I utilize okay, so you've got lucid dreaming, you've got sleepwalking. Now, when I sleepwalk, I manage not to just like trip over things and face plant. So there's something in my system that is aware of the environment. And yet there's something in my system that is keeping the dream going to the point that I do things that don't make sense, you know? What would be the equivalent of lucid dreaming in that place? You know what I mean? Like lucid dreaming in my awake body, sleepwalking.
Well, you would
know
still
what I
be,
mean?
yeah, I guess you'd still be technically asleep because, like,
What
when
the
you're
heck kind of
sleepwalking,
things can you summon then? But because you know what I mean? Like, can you call up things at that point? Because you're not in hypnopompia, I don't think. You know, and so it's kind of like I just kind of wonder.
Well, do you find yourself? Would you find yourself when you're sleepwalking? Side, I don't know how common this is, but like, do you find yourself sometimes doing activities with like things, but in your dream you thought they were like, you know, something else? Like, I don't know, like you thought you were like making like a cup of tea or something, but in your dream, but in your actual thing, you were like just picking up a blanket and messing with it.
Yes,
You know,
yes,
so-
100%. Like, like rooting underneath of the bunk bed for the test paper that was under the helicopter. That was a kid. That was a story when I was a kid. You know, it was
2
like,
weeks ago.
yeah, like, "Ah, damn it, where's that test? I gotta turn it in. So, yeah, but yeah, I will. In fact, I remember specifically, I came out one day. My older brother Pat was in the hallway. He had just come back from some night shift thing, and I was asleep. I had school the next day. He came out. I was totally asleep. He's trying to talk to me. I'm like not making much sense. He gives me one of those Girl Scout cookie things, the Thin Mint, and he hands it to me. I'm like looking at it. I don't know what the heck it is. And he's like, "It's a cookie. Look." And he eats it, and then he goes downstairs. He gets me milk and gives. He thinks it's hilarious because he's feeding me cookies, and I'm like totally asleep. So I'm like out there. And I'm like, okay, well, anyway, I'm gonna go back in here and whatever. I go back into the room. I lift up the page of the storybook so I can get back into the book of the story that I'm in. So look, I was totally not with it the whole time. And yet I'm carrying on a conversation with people in waking consciousness. So it's like, I've often wondered about that. And is there an equivalent of things that happen to people who are sleepwalking? Do they encounter things? I don't remember having had that experience, but
we should probably like catch that though, in case
Yeah.
you know, if you do want to talk about you know, what you can and can't do in dreams, as opposed to
Yeah.
entities trying to manipulate our.
yeah, no, exactly. Dreams are their own little. I need to do several on those. Probably will too. So okay, let's wrap it. I'll just go first since people are probably sick of hearing from me now. I'll wrap this up. Recognizable? Yes. Clearly very recognizable, both throughout history and throughout the world, and oftentimes winds up being an old woman. I'd be interested to see in societies that treasure old women, is it an old woman? You know?
Yeah, maybe it's more like the alien type thing or something.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. Or just, yeah, like a beast type thing or whatever, you know? In terms of, is it scary? Yeah, I think pretty much anything creeping around at night when you're half asleep is kind of scary. I'm not as scared of it because I don't experience the sleep paralysis thing. But as we said, it's not necessarily limited to that, some of these phenomena, although it's highly correlated. Um, and then, do I want to encounter this? No. No, I don't think so. There are other things but because if I have to be if I have to, no, I don't want to encounter it anyway. It does not seem like a nice thing. There are instances, though, of people summoning the Night Hag on other people. So,
well, that's just mean. And
yeah, and that's just a weird thing. They call it getting hagged. Yeah, it's common
It
enough.
sounds like a way to that sounds like some kind of weird slang for being drunk, particularly like some kind of you got hagged last night.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah. So I will give this. What's the top monster count? 5?
yeah.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of these wind up being 4 and a fraction.
We'll wait till we get to the really scary things.
Yeah.
The things that really keep you up at night.
I'm going to
as
give
opposed
it
to
a
keep you asleep at
4
night.
because before I researched it, I didn't really worry about very much. I scared myself with Bloody Mary the other night. I was turning off the lights and moving some curtains around and just had the thought. And I heard the voice in my head, "Who are you?" Which is like from Clash of the Titans, but it scared the hell out of me. I was halfway across the apartment by the time I realized it. Like, I gotta go finish what I was doing. But yeah, so, yeah. 4. I'll give it a solid 4. Not as scary as Bloody Mary.
I'll go next. I wish I remembered how I compared this to Bloody Mary, but I don't remember what I scored it. Recognition. I'm gonna give this a 4. I think it's fairly recognizable. I think most people are familiar with the concept of the hag or something similar. Scary. I don't like this thing at all. The idea. So it's very interesting. When I'm awake and it's the middle of the day or early in the day, like when I'm out of my bedroom, so not super early, not like 2 in the morning. I think it'd be a really cool experience for something like this. But then like when night falls and I'm getting ready to fall asleep, it's like, nah, I don't want any part of it. The idea. It's interesting you bring up Clash of the Titans.
The old one specifically.
The old one, obviously.
Yeah, the original.
Yeah,
Clash of the
not the
Titans,
weird remake.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you bring up Clash of the Titans because I immediately think of the Night Hag having like a, minus the snakes, but like a very Medusa face, like very scaly, very like just awful teeth and like just getting up in my face. Like that's kind of what I'm envisioning if I were to see this thing, and I want no parts of it.
That sounds about right.
So scary. Yeah, terrified. No, thank you. When it comes to real, I believe people are really experiencing something, whether it's, I don't think they're making it up. I don't think they're lying. I think they believe whatever it is real, whatever that is. But I'm inclined to think it's probably more likely sleep paralysis and tied into that. But there's always a possibility. There's always a possibility because we live in a world we don't know everything. So I'm kind of in between those two. And do I want to encounter it? That kind of goes with scary. I have zero interest in encountering this thing. And on a scale of 1 to 5 monsters, I'm giving this a 4. I think, no thanks.
Yeah, I'm gonna go recognition. I'll probably agree with you guys. It's pretty recognizable. So it's like, obviously lots of different cultures have this kind of thing. Scary factor. I'm gonna couch this into like 2 bits right here. So I'll say the first one, like the old woman iconography, the hag thing and all that stuff. I feel like that's just like this pretty old and misogynistic kind of trope. It's like probably both to our fear of, whatever, like culturally, like fears of, people on the fringes of society or independent women or like that kind of, or just like getting old is this horrible thing, it's like, it's just like, to me, that's not scary. And that's kind of like, and it feels a little like, obviously passe, or like dancing. Now they'll bring it into the shadow people kind of thing and like some kind of just general entity creeping on you in the night, whether it's a, however your brain ends up interpreting, but like, let's just say it's like just a general creepy being that you can't identify and you're just assigning whatever iconography comes to your head as scary. Like that's pretty kind of creepy. You know, so it's like, so I think that kind of element is scary, you know, because obviously when you're asleep, you're vulnerable, like you can't do things, like, you know, something getting at you when you're asleep is something that is frightening, you know. It's like because like that's the time when you are literally most vulnerable, you know. It's like you're, you know, it's like you can't defend yourself, you can't do anything, you can't hide, you know. It's like you know, it's like, I think it's why we like have the idea of like hiding under your covers, because that's the only thing left to keep you safe, you know. It's like as if that would help you, you know. And it's and that kind of thing. So it's like yeah, and so yeah, and like that, like I think like sleep paralysis, I had sleep paralysis a lot when I was a kid, a lot. Less so as an adult, but still when it happens, it does kind of freak you out. But I guess it's also something I've kind of lived with for a long time. So it wasn't, so it's like, I assume it'll be okay. But at the time when it's happening, it doesn't feel okay. It's like, but after you wake up, you're kind of freaked out for a few minutes, and then you kind of like, you're like, okay, well, I guess everything's all right now. It's just like you kind of, it kind of becomes a thing. But yes, I don't think I wouldn't want anyone else to encounter it. So I'm gonna say, do I want to encounter it? No. Even though I will say, like, at least in the sleep paralysis element, it's something that I have had experiences with. So, but yeah, scary factor. Yeah, like again, like the monsters, I'm just like, I'll probably give it, like, if we're talking more specifically about something creepy sneaking up on you at night and trying to get you, yeah, I'll give it a pretty much like a 3. That's pretty the median level of scary, you know. It's like, and you know, it's like, but yeah, it's but overall, and that's so that's where I'll stick that. Yeah. So.
In the event that you have a night hag encounter, any of you listeners out there, or any of either of you two, one of the recommendations seems to be that as soon as you can move, she's gone. So wiggling your fingers or toes seems to be enough. And interestingly enough, wiggling the toes or the fingers is one of the things I'll often have when people are emerging from hypnosis, because it brings them back into the body. It allegedly activates the vagus nerve, which is a long nerve, and it brings you back into the body and the senses of the body. So interestingly enough, when we were talking about states and things earlier, the same trick, quote unquote, I use to encourage people to emerge from the hypnotic state is the same trick that's being used to exit the hypnopompic, I can't even say it anymore, state, or this hag world place, hag world. There's a theme park for you.
I was just saying, as a like, at least in my experience of sleep paralysis, like, you really can't move anything. It's like you can't even get your fingers to move or your arms to move or anything. Like, yeah. I guess like my thoughts are often, the most common thing is like I was trying to move my arms more before I would be moving anything else. You know, I don't know why that would be that's usually seems to be the first body instinct, you know, that comes out of that. But anyone else who has sleep paralysis that's listening, write in and tell me why I'm wrong. I don't know.
Or pop it in the comments. Let us know your experience.
Yeah, or give me your experience of like, how do you deal with that? It's like or do you find it less scary now that it's happened to you much more often? Because I feel like it's not something I think it's either something you have or something you don't. You know, it's like you just like so it is like experience that, like, you know, it's kind of keeps. Just, you know, it's like I've never heard of somebody who said they've experienced sleep paralysis once, you know, in their life. You know, but kind of like similar to like your thing, like sleepwalking. Like, I think it's like either something you kind of do or you don't. Usually most people don't, like, well, I did one time I was sleepwalking and that was it, you know. It's like,
I wonder if, so it's interesting. I've heard this before too, where it's like people will say they'll try to scream. And they can't even do that. Like they can't create the necessary pressure with their lungs to like give a scream out,
or like call for help, like, or something, or try to get any kind of sound out. Yeah, But
so this is interesting. I just had this thought. Okay, so to an extent, we can control our blinking to an extent. Right. Okay, I wonder if you could. So it's interesting that in theory you could control that, but nothing else. And I wonder, like, could you flare your nostrils? Can you open your mouth? Can you close? Like, can you move anything or it's like you can't even control blinking at all. That it's like you're relying on your whatever part of your brain does that automatically. I don't know. But I just had that thought. And then I had this other thought too, talking about Baba, you said that when the minute or the second, shortly after, people can move, the hag is gone. And I just thought that was interesting with the state that I was in with my story, that like I was already moving around and I saw this thing. So I thought that was very interesting. And or was I, still in like a sleepwalking kind of state, or but interesting nonetheless when you pair those two together.
Yeah. Well, there's the thing you're saying about the blinking, like obviously blinking's like somewhat controlled, somewhat autonomic. I don't know this from my firsthand experience because I wasn't seeing it, but apparently when I was a kid, there were times where I would be asleep with my eyes open. Like, so you can be asleep. Like my mom, I guess, would come in and she thought I was awake, but I was asleep, but my eyes were still were open. So it's like, I guess that like, so I don't know that the blinking thing probably matters if you're still in that sleep state, like, so, yeah, but I don't know, like, again, it's not something you could observe. It's like, but I think Jared said something to the effect of like, sometimes even in hypnosis, people will have their eyes open during it, so it's like, so clearly like, your visual stuff can get also wonky or shut off or something without you just literally closing your eyes, and then obviously REM sleep, your eyes are moving, and often blinking as well, so it's but
in fact, I visualize better with my eyes open than I do with my eyes closed. So it is very odd. You wouldn't think that, but it's true.
It's interesting. I very similarly, if I am thinking about something and it is a very visual thing that I'm thinking about, so I'm like visualizing doing something like that, I'll be like doing something in real life and I'll just like stop and like my brain is going and I'm thinking about whatever like the activity that I'm planning on doing, and I'm like picturing it in my head, and like eventually I snap out of it. I'm like, I was in the middle of taking a shower. I got to finish my shower, or something.
Yeah, you've just been staring into space, but the information isn't coming in. The visual information you're experiencing is whatever it is you're thinking about. Sorry, any aphants out there that don't see visual images, but I guess there's a plus side too. I wonder if an aphant. All right, here you go. Are there any people out there that consider themselves to have aphantasia, or aphantasia, that don't see inner images in their mind, but also have experienced the Night Hag? I would love to hear that, because that's really interesting.
So I don't know enough about this. What are dreams like for people that have that? Do they still see stuff in their dreams? Is it
from people that I've talked to with it? Not so much.
Wow.
Yeah, like it's really, or some people, I mean, because I was trying to get to the bottom of it,
Why don't I just go quickly explain, give a little, just tell us what aphant, for people that don't know.
Sure.
Because I'm only more recently familiar with this phenomenon myself, so I didn't.
So the idea of, I say aphantasia, there are variations on it. And a person that has, quote unquote, the experience of aphantasia is an aphant, somebody that does not, and what it means is they don't make visual images inside their head when they're talking or thinking about visual things. So oftentimes, like, a lot of people don't think that they can visualize, and I'll say, okay, well, what color is your car? Or what color is the front door to your house? And they'll say, well, it's white. And I'll say, how did you know that? And then they'll say, oh, they have some kind of a visual image of it. But when I've talked to aphants, they don't seem to have any visual information of it at all. They just kind of know it. It's really hard for me to conceive of that, but I'm saying, so when I tell you, you don't picture anything, how do you know, like, you just know these facts? So what seems to be happening, and it's kind of, cognition is weird, there seems to be visual processing going on behind conscious awareness of it, maybe. And then they're aware of it on some kind of kinesthetic level, that there's a sense of yes, this is of something that they know. And then, so something knows it in them. Okay, so these folks don't, I've talked to both people that they're dreams don't seem to have any visual content, and people that it seems that they do. And I said, well, how do you know? How do you know that? Because you would have to have a memory of having a visual experience in your head. And what is that memory like if you don't have visual things in your head? You just know that you did? And so it's very confusing and hard to wrap your brain around, particularly if that's not how you experience things. However, listeners, if you experience things like that, and you've experienced a Night Hag, please
or shadowy,
or shadowy people, or the Hat Man, any of these things where you wake up in
Little gray guys.
little gray guys, let us know. I really want to know, what is the thing that allows us to perceive this, whatever it is.